Hi. With the sad passing of Eddie Van Halen, I just wanted to share a few thoughts about my experiences working with the man and the band back in 1993 when Little Angels had the massive fortune and privilege of touring with them. It was pretty unique as an experience because they hardly ever toured, as we know, over here. They spent so much time in America that it was quite uncommon that they came here. So we were exceptionally excited, as you can imagine, when we got that support slot for the band across the whole of Europe, because we'd all been enormous, and still are, enormous Van Halen fans. My first introduction to the band really was when I was, I guess, 13, 14 years old. One of the very first bands that me and Mark Plunkett put together was a band called Zeus, and we formed it at school. But we had a local guy called Wayne Horn, who was a guitar player who was older than us, and he kindly agreed to play with his bunch of young oiks. And we did a gig at Hunmanby Girls' School, because Mark Plunkett's mother was a teacher there. And I can remember after we'd done the gig, Wayne said, "Oh, you got to come and listen to this band. They're amazing, Have you ever heard of Van Halen?" And I said, at the time, I hadn't, I'll be honest. And he sat me down in his car. I was in the passenger seat, and he put on Eruption from the first record. And it utterly took my breath away. I'd never in my life heard anything like it. I can even remember saying to him, "What is that?" And he said, "That's a guitar." And I'd never, ever heard anyone play like that. Now, interestingly, I've always been a guitar fan, probably more so than a fan of singers in lots of ways. I started out, I certainly started on my road to a rock appreciation, really, being a huge fan of Hendrix. In fact, Jimi Hendrix's poster was the first poster I ever had on my wall, the Are You Experienced album. And that was kind of my entry point. I really wanted to be a guitar player, that was my whole dream, And at the time, like I say, it was Hendrix, and then for me it was Brian May with Queen, of course, and also, I think Ritchie Blackmore. So those guys occupied a lot of my headspace at the time until I heard Eddie play, and I'd never heard anything like that. It felt so fresh, so new, otherworldly almost, It sort of seemed to open a door in my mind that said something else is out there. And even though, as I kind of got to know who they were and I sort of bought the records, the fact that they were from California didn't seem to make any difference to me at all. I just felt it was, in fact, it enhanced it because it was a place that I could imagine, and it seemed to go hand in hand with the glory of the music and the sort of sense of freedom of the music. And, it was something else, So it was around that period, of course, that the 1984 album came out as well. And I remember as a young teenager, I was attending sort of house parties for the first time, and it was never off the record decks or wherever we were. Jump especially, it was a huge record, massive influence. And I sort of collected those records and, they just became my favourite band. And for me, they are the quintessential American rock band. They define all of those great things about America for me. The kind of sense of anything's possible, the joy, the freedom. And they sort of sum it up in their music, And of course, it wasn't just about Eddie. Obviously, David Lee Roth was an incredible frontman. They were the perfect storm. Michael Anthony, of course, staggering bass player, and Alex, playing the drums, obviously, and the very fact that they were brothers, and something unbelievable about that. And so that whole background of that growing up with their music, and then meeting Bruce and Jim, who were both enormous Van Halen fans. I know that Jim, regards Eddie as his greatest influence. We've often talked about it, that, you try to transfer the kind of Eddie Van Halen style guitar playing onto his keyboard when he had his keytar. Remember that thing he used to play, the SH-101? And of course, Bruce, everything from wanting to have a Beretta, Kramer Beretta, and, we worshipped them. And they were as important to us as The Who were, or Aerosmith, or any of these amazing bands. But I do think, certainly for me, Van Halen stood head and shoulders above every other band at the time. And I remember actually when we were touring with the band, I was talking to a female fan outside of Wembley Arena when we were doing that final show, and this fan said something really, really that stuck with me about Van Halen. That I said, "Oh, how long have you been following the band?" She said, "Oh, I've seen the band play in America, many times, and I'm absolutely blown away that they've come to the UK." But she said and I thought, I've got to get this quote right, but it said something like, "There's Van Halen and there's everybody else." And I know exactly what she means. The unique proposition of what they brought, the innovation, the complete and utter blowing off of the doors of the rock and roll business, reinventing guitar music, and a three-piece at that. It cannot be underestimated what they did, and what Eddie did, I think, really, with the way that he played the guitar. And I remember seeing an interview with him quite recently, actually, I saw on YouTube, where he described someone was asking him, how did he manage to make all those noises, all those squeaks? And he said, man, we were so poor, I couldn't afford all the pedals. I couldn't afford anything but the guitar and an amplifier. So I had to make those noises myself. I had to invent those noises because I couldn't afford to have the pedals. I know, and I think even till the day, he did his final gig, he was only using a couple of pedals. He wasn't using anything apart from his fingers, and that incredible connection his body had with the instrument. And I stood and watched, like we all did. We stood and watched Van Halen play every single night on that European tour. And he was extraordinary every night. No two shows were the same. There was always something new. There was always something different happening, even though they were playing very similar sets. It was incredible to witness. And the sound, that huge brown sound thing he used to call the brown sound, didn't he? That saturated guitar sound, and just the way he performed, it was just mesmerizing. And I realized I was watching true genius when I was watching him play. But the one thing that people won't know about Eddie, I think, and like I say, I'm not going to make a big deal about this. I didn't know Eddie Van Halen really, really well. I got to know him a little bit because we were touring with him and we were kind of colleagues. But because all of the band was such enormous Van Halen fans, the proposition of doing that tour and the fact that we ended up doing that tour was, I can't describe what a privilege it was, and how the anticipation was for us, because you don't know what it's going to be like. You don't know, meeting your heroes, like, it's such a tired cliche, but meeting your heroes it can be a difficult thing. But we needn't to worry. I mean, I'll give you a couple of anecdotes, because what I wanted to share these, because I've been thinking about these over the last 24 hours since the news broke. I know that Bruce Dickinson has told this story before, but I wanted to give my perspective on it as well, because it was very, very funny, but also very difficult at the time. But we basically were doing that Van Halen tour, on a shoestring budget, and we had to self-drive. And so we had a splitter van that we'd hired, and we went out on the road, and we were self-driving, and we got to the outskirts of Munich, because we were playing the Olympiahalle. I think it was the first show, and as I remember, and we got there with plenty of time. We got to the outskirts of the city with plenty of time. Now, there's a huge ring road that goes around Munich, and our trumpet player, Grant Kirkhope, was driving at the time, and we were on this enormous autobahn. And you got to remember, there was no sat navs. All we had was a map and a kind of and a sort of vague idea where we were supposed to be going. And basically, we couldn't get off the autobahn, and I think we must have gone around the autobahn twice or something. So by the time we ended up at the Olympiahalle, we were at something like an hour or two late, probably longer. We were hours late. And I can remember being met at the stage door by their tour manager, who was absolutely losing himself with anger. He was apoplectic with rage, about the fact that we'd turned up late. This was our big moment. We'd had all these management meetings, and we'd had to jump through hoops to get the tour in the first place, and here we were turning up late. So we sheepishly got our gear on the stage, and I think we sound checked in front of the audience that was already in the place, in the venue, and then we played, I think, for 20 minutes, something like 15, 20 minutes, something like that. So we were absolutely horror struck by this. We just thought we were going to lose the tour. So we went and hid in our dressing room. I remember we all went back and we were all like head in our hands, not what's going to happen and all the rest of it. And we'd been given our marching orders by this tour manager, and we were all terrified that this was all going to collapse around us. And the next thing I remember was this big banging on the door, and we're like, oh man, this is the moment, you know. The door flung open, and there was Eddie in a dressing gown with his guitar around his neck, laughing his head off. Hey, you guys, I heard what happened. And that was it. He gave us all a big hug. We had never met the guy before. It was all hugs all round and like laughing. And, you know, he came and sat in our dressing room and just carried on as if nothing had happened. And that was it. We never heard another thing about it. We were his mates, you know. I think he thought it was absolutely hilarious. And he did that through the whole tour. He hung out with us. I can remember bumping into him in the corridors many, many times where we just stand, either of us on either side of a corridor, just shooting the shit, talking about stuff, you know, whatever it was. But I never saw him without a guitar. That's the most amazing thing about it. It was always tinkling away. He was obsessed with sort of European pop music, I seem to remember at the time. There was quite a lot of sort of rubbish pop music in the charts, and he was talking about pop music quite a bit. And I remember he'd got completely obsessed with Lenny Kravitz's "Are You Gonna Go My Way," which was really, really funny. And this just went on and on and on, and he became our mate. You know, he became a big supporter, and you know, often was around when we were sound checking. He used to turn up. I remember him turning up in a blacked out windowed car, you know, and he'd tumble out the back of this car in the backstage area wearing the same clothes that I saw him in the day before. He had no airs and graces. He was totally down to earth. All he cared about was the music, and all he cared about was pleasing the fans, and he was softly spoken. He was mischievous, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a lot of stories I can't tell you, but he was mischievous, but he was never mean. He was a big-hearted, kind-spirited man, and you know, we just loved him. We thought he was fantastic, and I think the other thing about what people won't know about him is how humble he was. I can remember one particular incident. We were watching him play, I forget what venue it was, and he came off the stage in tears and kind of just like, that's it, man, I'm giving up, I shouldn't be on the stage. And we were like, oh, why, what's the matter? I think it was me, Jim, and Mark Richardson was there. And he was just beside himself. And I genuinely think he didn't know how good he was. I think that's kind of a measure of genius, is that they make it look so easy that it just comes out of them. It flows out of them. And he was certainly that way, you know. And I think he probably just didn't know that, you know. And we were all like, oh man, that was amazing. And it was one of the best shows I think we'd ever seen. And that was Eddie. He was just not full of himself at all. He was just the most easygoing guy, you know. And there are many, many other anecdotes I could talk about here, but I'll just want to mention one of them. There was one where we were in the dressing room, and Grant Kirkhope, again, our guitar player, and I've talked about this before, but it's worth reiterating it because it is an amazing story. We were all sat in the dressing room, and Eddie came in to see us, and he was sat with us, and we were all chatting away. And I remember Grant, who is never want for not coming forward, if you know what I mean. He always say what he wanted to say. And Grant said, why don't you play Hot for Teacher in your set? And Eddie sort of looked and said, oh, I don't know, man, you know, I don't know if I can even play it anymore, sort of thing. And had his guitar. He had the Frankenstein guitar, or the Frankenstrat, you know, and he was trying to play the hammer-on thing that's at the beginning of it. And I think I could see, like, we were all watching him do this, and he kind of wasn't getting it completely right. He was all the rest of it. And Grant went, oh, give it here, and kind of snatched his guitar out of his hands and then played it in front of him. And that's true. And Eddie sort of went, oh man, thanks a lot. He wasn't at all put out by this. He thought it was hilarious, you know, and brilliant, you know, and then took the guitar back. And I think they played it that night. I think it was probably the only time they played it on the tour, if my recollection. Probably a bit rose tinted now, I think, but that was my recollection of it. And that was just the way he behaved, you know. There was no problem at all, you know. And they treated us so well. It was an incredible experience, and one I'll never ever forget. I came off that tour feeling like we'd made some new friends, and it was really sad because right at the end of the tour, they really loved Little Angels, and they were inviting us to go and play at Cabo Wabo down in Mexico, and we were trying to make that happen, and for one reason or another it didn't, and I was regretted that we didn't push that a bit harder to make that happen because they really liked us, and yeah. And one of the great things that Eddie did, just as a final little recollection, was that he gave guitars to Bruce, to Grant, and I think Michael Anthony gave a bass to Mark Plunkett. I mean, it didn't have to do that, but had them ordered and had them sent over. I seem to remember we were in Norway, or Sweden or Norway, when they arrived, and they were presented to the guys. Just unbelievable stuff, So I have nothing but fond memories, and it's deeply, deeply sad that we've lost that genius, that talent. But what a legacy. What amazing music. What innovation. An absolute one-off. A unique musician. Absolutely worthy of the word genius. And the world will miss him, and I will miss him. And like I say, even though we didn't know him very well, he definitely brightened up my life and left me with something that will live with me to my dying day. So thank you, Eddie. Thank you for all your talent, and thanks for everything you did for us. R.I.P. Thank you.